Hi, I'm Jim, and welcome to Lessons from Incident Management at Atlassian. Let's start with a story. So, it's January 2017, around 1 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. I'm in a meeting with some other SRE folks. It's pretty low key. We're looking at some things in Jira, but suddenly it stops responding. We can't save or read any issues. That's interesting, I think. I take a quick look at the company chat and find that it's lit up with "Is X down for everyone or just me?" where X is a frighteningly broad list of systems across the whole company. It seems that there's a big outage in progress. Customers are getting errors when they try to log in. Atlassian can't sell any stuff. www.atlassian.com is off the air, and to top it off, our support system has crashed, so when our customers try to get help for this, they can't. I hear somebody's mobile phone go off, and I ask them, "Are you on call as major incident manager right now?" They look a little frightened and say, yeah, just as both of the company's founders walk into the room and ask what's going on in very serious voices. If something like this has ever happened to you or could happen at your company, then this talk should be really valuable to you. We're living in a software-powered world. No longer can we only serve our customers from 9 to 5, but we now need to have our services running 24/7, always on. Most SaaS companies today are practicing some variant of DevOps where they're running through a dev cycle from commit to deploy faster than ever before. At Atlassian, we're pushing code changes to dozens of heavily used SaaS products multiple times a day, but with speed also comes incidents. And my theory is that incidents are inevitable. They're a fact of life. They come with the territory of operating information systems, especially internet-facing ones. We will always have them, all of us, because incidents are an outcome of risk, and companies will always take risks in the name of competitive advantage. Innovation means risk, and risk means incidents. The difference between good and great companies is in how you respond and recover from them in order to make your systems more resilient. If your company's good at this, then you win your customers' trust, and you can spend more time innovating and less time fighting fires. But if you're bad at incidents, then you get a reputation for unreliability. You lose customers and wear your staff out without moving forward. At Atlassian, we sometimes learn the hard way, but over the years, we bedded down what I think are some pretty good ways of handling incidents and learning lessons from them via the postmortem. And that's what I want to share with you today. For some context, here's where Atlassian is at in terms of our scale and activity right now. We've got about 3,000 staff in engineering, support, and IT, offices in 7 countries around the world, many product, platform, and infrastructure teams, each of which has around 50 to 150 engineers under them. From an incident perspective, just like any other SaaS company that's pushing the envelope, incidents are a common occurrence for us. This is a very well exercised process that I'm talking about today, not something that we take off the shelf and dust off once a month to make sure it works. When we release a feature and we get more than a few support cases about it, that's an incident. Or if we see a performance or capacity regression, that means an incident is imminent, even if there's no current customer impact, that's one too. And this fits with the definition of incident, which I'll talk about in a minute. So Atlassian's process is heavily used by all technical teams across the entire company. And we have around 250 trained major incident managers who do this fairly regularly as part of their job. Incidents are topical right now because people all over the world are going through a massive incident, the coronavirus pandemic. In fact, I was originally meant to present this at Atlassian Summit in Las Vegas, which we changed to Remote Summit. So my presentation about incidents was impacted by an incident. Shout out to those of you who were heading to Vegas. I love talking with customers and I was really looking forward to seeing you there, but maybe some other time. If you have any questions or feedback for me, feel free to just send it to me directly via email at jseverino@atlassian.com. Okay, here's what we're going to cover in this talk. Some prerequisites for success with incidents, and then we'll talk about how an incident actually unfolds at Atlassian with a few key lessons, and then how we use incidents to make our systems more robust through the magic of the postmortem. So let's go. No matter what size or type of organization you are, there are a few foundational things that I think you need to get in place. Most of these are squishy and human, so technology people often don't talk about this stuff. But my experience has been that getting a few fundamental things right can set yourself can set you up for success with everything else that follows. These aren't part of any tool. You can't buy them off the shelf, but they're absolutely critical to getting incidents right. Number one, clear accountability for what happens when things break. In lots of organizations, this isn't anybody's job. When you have an incident, everyone rallies around and fixes it, but how that happens from start to finish isn't any one person's responsibility. Or maybe different groups have different pieces of the puzzle. When I joined Atlassian SRE in 2016, this was the case. Different groups would run incidents differently without really coordinating. Of course, the outcomes were varied and nobody was really on the hook for improving things. But if how incidents happen is important to your organization, then you have to make that someone's job and empower them to make improvements to that and hold them accountable for the outcomes that they get. At Atlassian, this was me. Just to be clear, accountability for what happens when things break does not equal accountability for reliability of all the things. Remember the theory that I talked about a minute ago. Incidents will always be part of our lives and they will happen to you. Your goal as owner of your company's process is to make response and recovery work as well as you can. When you have an incident, it doesn't mean that you failed. On the contrary, it's surprisingly useful to frame incidents as an unplanned investment in the reliability of your service. Turning incidents into a positive puts the focus on the opportunities for improvement instead of whose fault it is that everything's on fire. And incidents are absolute gold mines for discovering all kinds of valuable improvements. Once you decide to be accountable for incidents, you then have to decide what qualifies as an incident at your organization. There are a few standard industry definitions out there, but for us, as a company that primarily builds and operates software systems, those standard definitions didn't quite work. Instead, we found it useful to frame an incident or define an incident in terms of what level of business impact merits an exceptional response. If an event has enough business impact and is urgent enough to merit a response outside of our usual work, then we call that an incident and we run it as such. In other words, if a given situation would benefit from handling via the incident process, then go ahead and call that situation an incident. This is practical. It doesn't get bogged down in semantics, and that's important for something that needs to be useful during emergencies. This definition is also good because it distinguishes incidents from other non-emergency broken things like bugs and minor performance regressions. And we make that distinction clear on our severity guidelines, which set out how a given class of event, like an outage or a performance regression, map to a severity rating. I'm using the word guide here and not rule intentionally because incident severity is an inexact science. Incidents are messy and come in all shapes and sizes. Your process needs to handle them all. Your severity matrix cannot and should not try to define the severity for every possible incident. If it did, it would be huge and unreadable, and it still wouldn't cover everything. And you need this thing to be useful during emergencies. Instead, your severity guidelines should be broad, concise, and understandable so that people can use them during the incidents that they suddenly find themselves in. And if you follow this pattern, you end up with something like this, with broad descriptions of business impact like customers cannot log in the rows, and columns with levels of systems criticality and other factors described generally. You might be thinking, well, if all you've got are guidelines, and you don't make hard and fast severity rules like if you breach SLA, it's an automatic incident, how can you make sure that a given incident has the correct severity and you respond correctly? That's important, right? Well, what we decided to do instead of making a huge and unusable severity matrix was to delegate responsibility for setting appropriate incident severity to our incident managers. These are the people who are actually managing the incidents. And here's why this matters. The incident manager has overall responsibility for resolution. In order for this person to meet that responsibility, you need to give them authority over the entire scope of the incident, which includes the incident severity. At Atlassian, we decided to train, trust, and expect our incident managers to make important decisions during incidents, and that includes severity. These people, incident managers, are not just doing admin, going through a checklist or filling out a form. Incident manager is not a passive role. Incident management is a leadership role. Training, trusting, and expecting our incident managers to decide the best severity for the incidents they manage is part of empowering these people to do their job well. You're giving them the authority to lead the incident so they can bring their skills and experience as leaders to the table and shine during emergencies. In practice at Atlassian, this created ownership and accountability for incident outcomes within our engineering teams, where the incident managers worked. When things go badly wrong, we don't parachute in the incident police. Oh geez, it's these people again. Our engineering teams own the outage, they own the fix, and they own the mitigations afterwards. And that's important. We also discovered that our engineering executives were really keen on leading incidents, so we trained them as major incident managers, including both of our founders. So now when they join an incident, they know what's going on, and they've been in the incident manager's shoes. Making severity an incident manager's decision is important because the incident severity guides our level of response. For example, do we page people and wake them up, or can it wait until the next day? In order to make those kinds of decisions, you need to figure out how severity maps to priority in your organization so you can tell what kinds of other work will get preempted by an incident of a given severity. Here's an example. At Atlassian, we put the threshold for where an incident can preempt any other work at the whole company at Sev 2, major. Anything Sev 2 or higher will bring in people from across the company, take precedence over any other work, and even sacrifice future work by waking people up. If you remember the definition of incident from a minute ago, this level of response is appropriate because the business impact of a major incident is greater than the value of any other non-emergency work we have going on across the company. And we designed our severity guidelines from a few slides ago with this threshold of business impact in mind. And the whole point of these fundamentals, what this mapping of business impact to severity to priority does, is tie together all of these concepts about definition of an incident, accountability for the process, authority of the incident manager, and severity guidelines into a practical way to run incidents within an organization. It keeps your level of response proportional to the impact of an incident. And it also means that incidents are not just the job of one team, and it becomes possible to deeply engage the rest of your organization with the process. It lets you leverage your leaders to take active roles in incident and give staff who are so inclined a chance to shine. And finally, getting these fundamentals right lets you make clear decisions quickly during an incident. If you've been in many of them, you might be familiar with these kinds of decisions like, is this more important than the project deadline? Should we wake people up or not? Do we need to stop the release? And these need to be made by an incident team under uncertainty and time pressure, but we found that with these foundations in place, good answers tended to naturally result. And we set ourselves up for success with the rest of the process. The more concise and clear your fundamentals around incidents are, the easier your job is going to be as the owner of your organization's incident process. So next I'm going to talk about the process, but when someone gets up on stage and starts talking about processes, it tends to put people to sleep, right? Process is a boring word, so let's just call it what happens when things break. I'm going to take you through what happens when something breaks at Atlassian and highlight some design principles that I think might be useful for you when you're considering your own incident process. I mean, what happens when things break at your organization. I wanted to take a minute to talk about how we're handling the current coronavirus situation and how it relates to this topic. Yes, it's an incident, a big one with a large business impact. The difference is that it goes on a lot longer than most of our incidents, involves different groups of people, and changes hour by hour as opposed to minute by minute. Most of our incidents are technical, for example, an infrastructure failure or an unexpected bug reaching production. They're usually resolved in an hour or two and only involve technical teams. But we're handling coronavirus as what we call a crisis, which is an escalated state of incident management. Our HR and legal teams are driving the response with daily status meetings, many streams of work running around the world. Most of the things that I cover in this presentation are relevant to a crisis like this. It's just bigger and goes on a lot longer than most. Okay, here's our process in diagram format. It's got lots of boxes and arrows. It starts with something breaking on the left and ends with resolution on the right. And I'm not going to go through this in detail, but you can pause now if you want to take a close look. I'll be walking through the top fork there, what we call a major incident, or Sev2 plus. From the incident manager's point of view, an incident looks like this. You start by claiming the IM role, create the communication channels, assess the business impact, tell people about it inside and outside the company, bring people into the incident, give them roles to play, develop theories about why things are happening, do work, observe results, and repeat until resolution. That's what we're going to walk through now, but first I wanted to talk about training. If you don't tell people what to do in an emergency, you can't expect them to do well. Incidents are fast-moving, high-pressure situations, which are exactly the best things to give people training on. So you need to train everyone who is expected to take part in an incident. At Atlassian, all of our staff do a 1-hour online basic training course in incidents, which teaches them how to recognize one, what to do when they see one, and how to work as part of an incident response team. We train our major incident managers much more rigorously, starting with a 4-hour group class, and then apprenticeship, and then that final that can fly solo. Training primes your people to be effective and not to get hung up on the basics, like what's the difference between a Sev2 and a Sev3? What does an incident manager do, or how do I find the chat room? Training can't completely replace experience, but it does help people come up to speed a lot faster and have a less stressful time in incidents, which lets them get the most and learn the most from the ones that they participate in. So I highly recommend having a training program for incidents at your company. Make sure everyone goes through it. Then, like us, you'll probably find that it's one of the best investments that you can make. So back to the process. First, where do incidents come from? When things break, a piece of data representing the incident gets created manually by humans or automatically based on alert rules in a tool like OpsGenie or Jira Service Desk. This data will be your source of truth for the incident, where it all gets tracked through its lifetime. The important thing here is to make incident creation as simple and concise as possible. Put yourself in the shoes of a person at this time. You know something's broken, you think it might be bad, and you want to kick off a response. You don't need to be filling in a massive form or considering the implications of 7 different checkboxes right now. You want more of a big red button type of interface with just the essential details. What are you seeing? How bad is it? And which bit do you think is broken? That's all you need to know to kick off incident response, so you can keep your incident creation low friction and concise. And this is the first principle that I'll point out. Everything about the conduct of an incident needs to be simple. It's just the well-known KISS idea. If you want it to work when things are on fire and everyone's a little stressed out, then make it and keep it dead simple. Next, put yourself in the shoes of an incident manager. You've been alerted and you're on the hook for the response. In an emergency, it's critical that everyone is really super clear about who's in charge. So you need to have a really obvious incident manager role, and who is in that role at any time has to be totally clear and only one person. OpsGenie comes with the built-in incident commander role, or Jira's assignee also works well for this. So the first thing you do when you get that alert as incident manager is take that role and make it clear that you're the one leading the response. Doing this quickly is important because it tells everyone that a response is underway, funnels everyone into a single team, and prevents multiple independent responses from kicking off. Next, you want the team, the response team, to be able to communicate. So you've got to set up the channels that they use. And some people have strong opinions about this, about what the best ways for incident teams to communicate are. Chat, video conference, radio, Morse code, interpretive dance, whatever. It's my experience that incident team comms don't have to be either or. And this is because each medium has its advantages, so we should use each of them for what they're good for. As human beings, we are optimized to communicate face-to-face in the same place at the same time. It's the highest bandwidth interface that we have. And if you all happen to be in the same place, it's natural to just talk to each other about what's going on. But our teams are usually distributed all over the globe these days, so the next best thing to being in the same room is a group video call. But chat is also great. You get a timestamp record of who said what when, which is critical for incidents. Or if you join partway through, you can scroll back up and see what happened before. You can share links, log lines, and charts like this one. But an incident is fluid and constantly evolving. It's hard to make everyone who joins it scroll all the way up and read all the chat just to understand what's going on. So what do? You need somewhere to keep track of the incident state, what the impact is, changes you've made, what your theories and streams of work are. Any shared simultaneously editable document is good for this, like a Confluence page or Google Doc. These really come into their own for tracking incidents that go on for a long time and become complicated. So the team uses three things simultaneously to communicate: a video call, text chat, and also an incident state document. Each one is good for different things, so the team can use each of them for the things that they're best at. But as an incident manager who's trying to get a response off the ground, you don't want to be clicking around and setting things up in all these different systems right now because brain cycles and time are at a premium. You also don't want people doing things differently from incident to incident, like sometimes we name the chat for the incident and sometimes it's named for my favorite color that day. You need these things to be consistent so that everyone knows what to expect in an emergency. So this is a very good place to invest in automation and make like one setup comms button that anyone can mash that automatically sets up all of the incident team comms without anyone having to think about what they need to do or how they need to do it. What this does is it reduces confusion in the early stages of an incident where it's most effective. And because incident team comms are always set up the same way, anyone who needs to join the response team already knows how. OpsGenie, of course, has a lot of features in this area, like the Incident Command Center and Conference Bridge, or you can make your own automation, for example, using Jira webhooks, which is what we did a few years ago. So this highlights our second design principle for incident processes, which is to focus your automation investments on the opening stages of an incident, what I call the first 20 minutes in air quotes. This is the part of an incident where facts are at a minimum and uncertainty and stress are at a maximum. So automating things like comm setup tend to be really good ideas here and pay off quite well. Next, you've taken the incident manager role and open communications channels for the response teams. Now you've got to look at the impact and decide if we're running it at the right severity. Do you remember how we kept incident creation simple? Initial severity was set by automation or by the human who reported the incident. Now what the incident manager needs to do is quickly validate severity by finding out what we know and assessing the business impact. Typically, this means asking first responders what they're seeing and then checking it against the severity guidelines. Speed is the important thing here. You want to get just enough detail and not waste too much time in information gathering. It doesn't make that much difference in the first 20 minutes if 50% or 80% of customers can't use Jira. It's top priority either way, and we need to fix it at max speed. So we train our incident managers to get the salient facts quickly, focus on how the customer experience is impacted and not the technical details, and then also bias towards a higher severity because over-responding is less of a problem than under-responding normally. Next, once you confirm severity, you need to tell people outside of the incident what's going on. We're in like minute 7 here, still in that first 20 minutes of a major incident. There are two groups of people that you need to tell about an incident. People inside your organization via what we call internal comms, and customers or the public via what we call external comms. Both types of communication take some skill to do well, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to cover the specifics of how we do them, but I do want to pass on some of the easy wins that we've found in this area over the years. For internal comms, we broadcast them, but allow for responses. This is because most people are only interested in if it's fixed yet, but some people, typically higher ups in the company, are going to have legitimate follow-up questions about what's happening. What we do at Atlassian is post on an internal status page and send email updates simultaneously. And then we can have Q&A via email if needed. OpsGenie has a stakeholder update feature that handles this for you, which is also a good example of applying automation to minimize cognitive overhead. When you're in an incident, it's easy to get blinkered and omit some significant piece of context when you're drafting internal comms. For example, this incident only affects users of the Hungarian language pack. So we use this rubric right here to help the humans consistently include all of the important information in their comms. This rubric is included in the Atlassian Incident Management Handbook that you can download from our website. Templatize everything, all of your comms, and put the guidance right there on the template. For internal comms, that means making the interface that you use to create them match the things that we need included in the comms. This is our interface right here, and we've taken our 5-point checklist that you saw a minute ago and put it right where the person who's drafting the comms is going to be looking with their eyes. So they don't need to go and remember to check some separate cheat sheet for what they need to include because they see it in the course of writing their comms. Opsgenie and similar systems have email templates that do the same thing. For external comms, make succinct, pre-approved templates for staff to use during customer impacting incidents so they can communicate with customers quickly and safely. And then for that small number of typically very important cases where the templates aren't going to cut it, you also need clear criteria and steps for escalation to your PR and legal folks. And if you really want to be good at something, you practice it, right? Comms are really hard, so the people who are going to be sending comms during incidents need to practice. In our incident manager training, we do workshops where we describe incident scenarios, the students draft comms, and then we share and critique them. We also give feedback via email on our real incident comms day to day and CC all the other incident managers so all of our incident managers see constant feedback about each other's actual internal comms. The next stage of an incident, after you've told everyone inside and outside the company what's going on, is to assemble the right response team when we're still in that first 20 minutes. Just like the rest of an incident, escalation needs to be dead simple because the price of complexity at this time is very high. Which team to page for what has to be totally clear. And this is why Opsgenie and similar systems have the concept of services that are owned by teams which are on call. You need this or some other map of your organization's systems to who is on call for them in order for your incident managers to accurately escalate. And then once you bring people in, you as the incident manager need to tell them what to do. Once again, you don't want to be inventing things from scratch in the first 20 minutes of a major incident, so we have the concept of roles. You need to predefine a set of incident roles and train your people on them so everyone knows what the roles are and what they do. This makes that critical initial period simpler, and then later on in the incident, it makes people like Legos. You can snap them in and out of the team as they get tired and fresh people come in. Typical incident roles besides incident manager include tech lead, comms lead, scribe, and subject matter expert. So you delegate roles and everyone does what their role is supposed to do. And then you repeat these steps in a cycle. What are we seeing? Tell people about it and get the right people fixing it. If you've heard of the Deming cycle or plan, do, check, act loop, it looks a lot like that. Then when are you done? When can you disband the team and send everyone home? You remember how we talked about framing incident severity in terms of business impact and how a level of business impact equates to priority and this makes it an incident in the first place? Conversely, we say that an incident is resolved when the current or imminent business impact is over. No more business impact, no more incident. This definition clearly demarcates the end of incident response, the end of an emergency. So as soon as we've mitigated the business impact and we're reasonably confident that recurrence is not imminent, the incident is resolved. We close down the response and everyone can go back to what they were doing, working, sleeping, whatever. This is good because we don't want to prolong it. We have a lot of these every year and it's bad enough that all these people got interrupted and we're already paying the opportunity cost of whatever else they were working on. But keeping them spinning in an incident without a good reason would only make it worse. So we found that it's a really good idea to not hold the incident response team on station any longer than we need to. And that leads to the last design principle. Maintaining a healthy allergy towards admin overheads is really critical. Incident processes are like magnets for administrivia, like fill in this giant form when you resolve an incident. But things like that have a big negative impact in emergencies, and eventually your people will stop trusting the process. So you as the owner need to jealously guard a clean incident process and keep the barnacles off, so to speak, so that it flows smoothly and supports your people in emergencies rather than obstructing them. So that's the actual bones of our incident process, what happens when things break from end to end, from start to finish. We developed this process over hundreds of incidents, and we found that things work much better if we remain true to these few overarching principles, and I hope you also find them useful. Next. The final responsibility of the incident manager, once they resolve the business impact, is to get an owner for the postmortem. These are the magic that turn bitter incident lemons into sweet resilience lemonade. Incidents are like experiments that can validate or invalidate a system's design and engineering. And as experiments, they're fantastic opportunities to apply the scientific method to your systems. What did we think would happen versus what actually did happen? Why, and what are we going to do about it? This is what the postmortem seeks to discover. Unfortunately, there's an array of powerful factors working against us that frequently cause postmortems to fail, the biggest of which is simply the way we think. We've evolved as humans to make quick, judgmental decisions about things that are bad, because this kind of thinking was a survival advantage when tigers and murder were much more common than they are now. But that kind of thinking is exactly what you don't want when it comes to a postmortem. In the classic Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman characterizes the human mind as a machine for jumping to conclusions. What that means is that when we hear a story that seems plausible or that fits with other things that we know, we have a tendency to latch onto that story and believe it even in the face of later evidence to the contrary, sometimes quite stubbornly. We also seem to have an innate desire to judge people and a surprising ability to be unfair about it. With hindsight, we tend to look back at the people who were in a situation and say, well, they should have done the obviously right thing instead of the wrong thing. They've made an error. But a postmortem needs to find out and understand what actually did happen, not what you think should have happened. So this tendency towards judgment causes it to miss the point and go down an unproductive path. I learned about this in Sidney Decker's book, The Field Guide to Understanding Human Error, where he calls it counterfactual reasoning. Finally, personal incentives often work against a good postmortem result. Real mitigations often require difficult changes or substantial effort. It's also often hard to assess the quality of a postmortem because the value it delivers is in the form of things that don't happen, future incidents. So if the personal outcome for the individual running the postmortem is the same, then why should they make it any harder for themselves than it already is? If it doesn't make any difference, then it's often easier to choose a cosmetic or ineffective mitigation instead of taking a hard look at things that might be difficult. So it takes some planning and vigilance to make sure that people are correctly incentivized to do good postmortems. And these factors cause even some high stakes life critical postmortems to reach poor conclusions, like in some airline accidents where you see the phrase pilot error used to mask systemic problems. So what hope do we have here in the world of information systems? How can we get it right when professionals with lives at stake often get it wrong? So my theory is that by being aware of what's working against us in postmortems and keeping a few tips in mind, we should stand a good chance of delivering successful results, successful postmortems, more often than not. And here's tip number one. This one you should already know. The job of the owner of the postmortem is to figure out why the system failed, not to find someone to blame for it. Casting staff as the causes of incidents is counterproductive. It makes people feel like their status or future prospects are under threat. And then when people see that risk, that trumps their desire to act in the organization's best interests. They'll start covering for themselves instead of being honest about what happened and why. Think back to that example from the start of this talk, that big multi-systems outage. As it turned out, the cause was a change to a DNS zone file made by hand by an engineer. They were following an established procedure to make the change, and this particular engineer had even made identical changes many times in the past without incident. But this time, the engineer just forgot that zone file comments are semicolons, and the resulting change of events took down most of our systems. It would have been easy for us to conclude in the postmortem that this was human error and tell the engineer that they really needed to pay more attention next time, but we didn't do that. Instead, we recognized that we had a problem with the way that we made these changes. It had a small chance of an extremely adverse outcome. Because the engineer and their colleagues were confident that they wouldn't get thrown under the bus, they had a candid discussion about why the procedure was this way, and as a result, we decided to invest in automation that removed the need for continuously diligent operators. We've never had this class of incident since, and the engineer in question still works at Atlassian. So it's crucial that your people feel safe sharing the facts. John Allspaw puts this really well in his seminal 2012 paper, Blameless, Postmortems, and a Just Culture, which I encourage you to read if you haven't already. Second tip, our heads of engineering review and approve every postmortem for their area. These are the most senior individuals for any given product, platform, or infrastructure, like the head of Jira engineering or networks. When they approve a postmortem, they're both endorsing its conclusions and committing to the mitigations. They're accountable for this to their boss, and it's visible to their peers who are other heads of engineering and architects. This transparency creates a high quality bar for our postmortems because they're subject to review and input from our top engineering decision makers. And on the opposite, what can happen if you don't have this level of visibility is that postmortems can get buried. After an emergency, everyone moves on, and the postmortem gets delegated to the most junior people. And then, even if the postmortem does manage to come up with useful mitigations, they have an uphill battle for priority. Whereas if the head of engineering puts their stamp on it, it's going to get done. And that relates to my third tip, track the mitigations that come out of your postmortems in detail. Incomplete mitigations represent risk. And if you don't have any visibility into what's done and what's not, you're missing a lot of the picture about risk at your organizations. Also track repeat incidents, so you can tell if that feedback loop from bitter incident lemons into sweet resilience lemonade is actually working or not, which is the whole point of this exercise. Getting that payoff from the unplanned investment in the reliability of your service. Fourth tip, doing good postmortems is hard. It's a skill that you should recognize. You should cultivate it and develop it. We talked about why they're hard and what the obstacles are. Delivering value in the face of those obstacles is a skill. The better your people become at it, the better your postmortems will be. Fifth and final tip, cultivate a resilient organization. Some companies are just better at failure than others, meaning that when they have incidents, they recover quickly, they identify the root causes, and they improve in a way that makes that type of incident less likely to happen in the future. This is resiliency, and it has a couple of hallmarks. If your people know what the rest of the organization does with the things that they make, and they know how the things that they make fit into the overall picture of the business, then this understanding will make you more resilient. If your people know this, then they'll understand what the essential parts of what they do are, and they can relate the steps that they follow every day to the actual value that they provide. They'll be much better at assessing how changes to the way things are done will affect risk. For example, saving time by upgrading all customers at once might sound like a good idea until the day the upgrade goes horribly wrong and it's everyone at the same time. The more people who understand the context of their work, the more resilient your company will be. And the opposite of that would be a siloed company where teams throw things over walls to each other and don't understand how their outputs are used or how their work supports the bigger picture. And your people need to feel empowered to ask questions about their work like, why are we doing it this way? Would it be better if we did it some other way? Or what's the point of this? A culture of inquisitiveness, curiosity, and feedback will lead to better understanding and cross-team connections, which will in turn make your organization more resilient. So make your people feel safe asking questions and speaking up. Do it yourself so you become a model for a culture of honesty and transparency, and reward it where you see it, because we need all the help we can get. Postmortems are harder than they look. Even the pros often fail. But I think if we understand the natural factors that work against us, Avoid personal blame, involve leadership, pay attention to the data, cultivate those postmortem skills, and take it on ourselves to build a culture of transparency and accountability. Then we'll have a decent chance of success. To conclude, it's important to acknowledge that incidents are and will remain a fact of life for modern companies in our software-powered world. They are certainly going to happen to you and your organization. They're going to be demanding and sometimes stressful. And afterwards, finding and fixing their true causes will present challenges that are deeply rooted in human nature. But instead of feeling powerless about it, you can decide to take control. How well prepared you are when you get that alert is entirely in your hands. You can decide right now to take accountability for your incident processes, train your people, automate those first 20 minutes. Decide to honestly and transparently find and fix the true causes of your incidents, be they technical, organizational, or cultural. Decide these things so that next time things go wrong, you will get maximum return on your unexpected investment. Thank you.